Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Katie and I are excited to chat with you about some observations we've had and some lessons we've learned over the last 5 to 6 months. So we're talking today about manufacturing technology and specifically some capabilities for changing environments. And you could certainly say that over the last 5 to 6 months, we've had some changing environments. So diving right in, from a summary perspective, COVID-19 has dramatically changed the life sciences manufacturing industry. You could argue it's changed almost every industry. And if you're familiar with life sciences, what we like to talk about in MasterControl is the life sciences industry. One of its benefits is it's generally recession-proof, or at least recession-resistant. COVID, I don't think, is the norm, and certainly as we've looked back over 2008, 2009 recessions and others, COVID is having a more dramatic impact than the typical recession would. So forward-thinking companies that have already deployed technologies to help them through this, we're going to cite some of those. And our hope is if you've not already deployed the technology that these customers have that were forward-thinking, perhaps today you'll learn some lessons and use that as an opportunity to deploy similar technology.
Great, thanks Brian. So looking at the key takeaways, as Brian mentioned, the workplace and the current environment are changing more quickly than ever before. And with the current pandemic, we've seen a situation where it felt like almost overnight we had hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people who were encouraged to work remote if they could. And this was a very new situation that people are learning to deal with. Many of our MasterControl customers have seen an increase in demand for their products and also decreases in demand for certain products as well. And with this changing environment, flexibility, of course, is a critical element for success, and going digital is a huge part of that. And a paper process really does not lend itself well when we need this kind of flexibility in our work environment. So we're going to touch on that, as well as touch on some of the benefits in general of going digital, such as access to data. Access to your data, once you have that in a digital environment, is a huge motivator for a lot of companies as they look towards implementing a digital system, and we will touch on some of the benefits of access to data in digital format.
Great, thanks Katie. So quick introductions. One of the reasons I can talk about the 2008-2009 recession is I've been in this industry for quite some time. It's 3 decades now. So I've seen a lot of ups and downs, and fortunately at MasterControl we have lots of ups during those times because we do serve a life sciences market that is generally recession resistant. My experience is software, started with IBM. I've been with MasterControl since 2002, and I'm on the product management side of the house, working with customers, trying to figure out what it is that we need to build to help solve their pains and problems.
Great. And my name is Katie Farley. I am currently a product manager at MasterControl. I worked in a variety of industries before coming to MasterControl about 5 years ago, and I've spent most of my time working on MasterControl's manufacturing solution. So I work with Brian, working closely with our customers to understand more about their processes and what their problems are, and also directly with our engineering teams that are developing the product to help understand how we want to translate those into our software.
So let's talk about several elements or maybe aspects in the manufacturing industry that have been exposed or exacerbated by COVID-19. First and foremost, the title of the slide, adaptability and scalability, is the key background. But we're going to look at 3 different scenarios that we see customers experiencing in the marketplace. As Katie mentioned, hopefully you're one of those customers that is seeing increased demand. We've seen one of our customers that has a 12x production increase. We've seen another customer that has a 20x production. So just to make sure everybody's aware, they're producing 20 times as much as they normally would. Certainly would be a positive thing to have. It's better to have 20 times more than 20 times less. But it will be one that stresses an organization. As another data point, as some of our customers have experienced that increased demand, we've actually delivered emergency licenses to them, which means we didn't go through the hassle of commercially understanding what we were going to charge them. We just delivered them licenses because this situation is dire enough that we felt we just needed to get them the capabilities. So as you look at those companies that are increasing or experiencing such increased demand, you need to look at that. The second bullet up there is the need to scale quickly is paramount. One that you might not consider first off, depending on where you're working, the ability to manage the supply chain. So if your company has to produce 20x the amount of product, that means you need 20x the amount of supplies or materials. So there's a significant problem there or challenge, particularly if you keep in mind that during these times, some of your normal suppliers probably may not be working, or they may not be able to provide enough. So as you expand the number of suppliers that you need to work with, you also have to maintain your current levels of quality, if not improve, and still need to deliver the product quickly. So those are the best case scenarios. You've got increased demand and still have challenges. The second bullet is the decreased demand. And hopefully there are some companies that have a single product. If you have a single product, hopefully you're in that top category. You're just experiencing great increased demand. If you have a single product and you're experiencing decreased demand, your focus is quite a bit different. It's about how to survive, how to keep your staff employed, etc. And so being able to pivot quickly in those situations, if you only have a single product, it's really, really challenging. The third scenario is what we see more often, and that is there are very few companies that have a single product. And so some of the products will be experiencing increased demand, and some of the products will be experiencing decreased demand. And so as an organization, what one must do is shift the resources from those that are lower on demand to those that are higher on demand. And as one example of a customer that would be experiencing decreased demand, you could be a medical device manufacturer that provides a product for elective surgeries. And as most of you probably will remember, elective surgeries were outlawed or ruled out. They couldn't be done. It's coming back, but for a period of time, elective surgeries not being able to be administered, then that meant you didn't need those products. So what we're hoping is through the use of technology, companies are able to better manage the mix, and that is between those products that have high demand and those products that have low demand.
Great. Looking at the trends of remote workforce, which is something that has really come to light over the last several months, the trend of working remotely is really something that we've seen increasing over the past several years, and especially for technology companies like software companies, maybe a Facebook, a Google. Those type of companies a lot of times have the infrastructure in place already to work from home successfully with little notice. But many in the life science industry, for example, may lack those standardized work from home processes, especially as they relate to the manufacturing process, because they really haven't had to face this situation before. So now we have a new situation that many in the life science industry are grappling with, where employees used to work together every day, maybe passing paper back and forth, getting signatures, paper on the manufacturing floor. And now we are faced with a new challenge where some of that just is no longer possible. So real-time collaboration, of course, is incredibly critical, both within departments when people are not in the same physical location, whether it's because of a requirement for remote working or not, as well as across divisions and global locations. So even for those that are used to working with people in different locations in different countries, this is still a unique aspect because you may not have all the resources that you're used to having available to you inside of your office. Along with the need for real-time collaboration, there's also a need for accurate, up-to-date data and real-time reporting. It's critical that people who need it have access to the data when they need it, and that we don't see a decrease in efficiency because of the need to work remote. And then the last point on here is about risk. In any circumstance, there's a risk for not having a standardized process, but especially when we're talking about remote work, whether it's the need to collaborate on updating a work instruction or to look at a batch record that's ready for review and have multiple people reviewing and getting signatures and signing off on that. All of these things are very critical when it comes to making sure you have a standard process that can facilitate successful remote work.
And just on that point, I was thinking about how often it is you and I just chat with each other because we work next to each other. Hey, what do you think? Is this how you do it? That's not possible in the remote work environment, or certainly takes a little bit more effort to actually do a Skype call or a WebEx call or a Zoom call to look at that. So remote is definitely a new trend or an increasing trend, as Katie mentioned. And I'll use that also. There's been an ongoing trend probably for 10, 20 years for increasing the amount of outsourcing. So the number of contract manufacturers or the number of partners that you're dealing with, that's already a trend. And one observation is a lot of the trends we're talking about today, COVID just greatly accelerates those trends. And so instead of something changing over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, we're now talking about 5 to 10 months. This is another one of those areas. And I'll use that supply chain example again. Pretend you're a company, your demand for your product, respirators or some other PPE, you have the opportunity and the obligation to deliver 20 times. 20 times the demand may still not be enough. So you're going to do everything you can, but you need suppliers to go along with you. And if those suppliers are out of business, if they're not able to conduct their work remotely because they weren't forward thinking and didn't have the technology in place, then you have to go find another set of suppliers. And keep in mind, when we're talking about suppliers here, this is global. So early on in COVID, China, if that was where you were sourcing a lot of your materials, there were some very significant problems there. So there's a term called planned deviations. Well, planned deviations in today's world, when you're dealing with using a different supplier than you originally planned, planned deviations probably have become the norm. And the real challenge, as you expand the ecosystem and you pull in more materials, more suppliers, more partners across the board, you're still responsible for maintaining the same levels of quality. And that's a daunting task even in a normal environment. But if you increase the number of variables, then it becomes even more critical. And it's even more challenging if you couple with that what Katie just highlighted. You're not even in the office. You're not on the shop floor. You're at home looking at Zoom calls or whatever your tool you're using. So these are tremendously difficult challenges that life science manufacturers are facing in the COVID times. So that was a little bit doomy and gloomy. I'm an optimist, so I also look at it as that being a challenge. It's also an opportunity. Hopefully you are one of those companies that experiences and delivers products that has tremendous demand. How can you handle those challenges? How can you address those? By applying technology where it makes sense. And so this slide is titled Applying Technology Across the Product Lifecycle. To me, it's one of those still unknown elements. Most life science manufacturers still use way too much paper within their own processes. And so we'll look at one of those as one of those aspects, specifically on this slide. So the theme of this webinar, at least one of them, is how to be more adaptable and more scalable. And it's a little interesting. If you think about paper, paper is ultimately flexible. It's a clean slate. You can do whatever you want with the paper. There's probably an airplane joke in there about you can make a hat, you can make that's going back to an old comedy that Katie probably hasn't seen, but that's okay. But really it's ultimately flexible. But the challenge is once you get something on that paper, it's managing the rogue documents. So whether it's a quality control problem with document control, or it's out on the shop floor with work instructions, once it's on paper, how do you ensure everybody's using this same version of the content that's on that paper? So we have some examples of some companies that were forward-looking and have deployed technology, and as a result, they've been able to better handle or address the challenges of COVID. The first one I'd like to highlight is a really interesting company called EpiGuard. Their main product is EpiShuttle. So if you think about COVID during these times, if somebody has a coronavirus and they have to be transported somewhere, could be in an ambulance, it could be in a helicopter, it could be on a plane. Everybody around them, if you just draw the visual in your own mind, everybody around them has to be geared up, just like they were in the operating room. Well, that's pretty problematic and tough to do if you think about going on a helicopter or a plane. So EpiGuard, quite a few years ago, maybe 10 I believe, had created this technology when Ebola was a real problem. Unfortunately, it didn't become as bad as COVID has. But essentially, they've created a bubble that the person who is infected with coronavirus or whatever the infectious disease is put into. So instead of having a regular stretcher, they get into this bubble. And then as a result, all the first responders on the plane, helicopter, emergency room, etc., they don't have to gear up nearly as much. So that's the product. And as you can imagine, right before COVID, their demand was, it's an interesting product, but the demand wasn't super high. With COVID, their demand has skyrocketed. And this is the company that I referred to whose demand has increased 20 times. So their challenge is, as I've cited before, supplies, materials, where can they get their materials as they skyrocket? How do they maintain their quality? They've deployed technology that have allowed them to better manage the specifications and address with the quality issues, even though their team is working remotely and around the world.
Yes, I have another example. So many people have heard recently the name dexamethasone, which is actually a steroid that's used for anti-inflammatory purposes. And according to the World Health Organization, it's been effective in the treatment of COVID and has been shown to reduce the mortality of patients on ventilators by up to a third, which is very substantial. One of MasterControl's customers, Fagron, is a 5013B compounding pharmacy, and they actually fill requests for this medication. And this is a very large organization. They are operating in 22 countries, in almost 50 locations. They have almost 3,000 employees, and over 300 members of those employees are in the quality group. So a very large organization, as they're looking at scaling and meeting this extremely large increase in demand for this product that's been shown to reduce the symptoms of COVID. Luckily, they had their QMS and their digital quality management system in place before this happened, and because of that, they were really able to meet the rising demand by helping to organize sourcing documents, coordinating and qualifying audits. They were able to essentially continue their work as they were before, despite the increase in demand, despite the fact that many people were going to work from home, and that was very critical to their success in handling this increase in demand.
Great. Another set of customers that MasterControl has is laboratories. And if you think about the laboratories, what they would typically be doing is testing results, maybe for a new employee who has to do some drug testing, or maybe for any individual that needs to do some blood and biologics testing to check out cholesterol levels, things like that. Normal, everyday, day in, day out. However, during COVID times, these laboratories probably are shifting their business. We know of one specifically called Nelson Laboratories. They're the one of the customers that has increased in overall demand by 12 times, and they've shifted their focus to looking at protective equipment and specifically efficacy for those. So testing face masks, testing respirators, etc. And so thinking about it, it seems like that's relatively easy to do, but they've got to go change their entire organization and what the people are doing, what their operators are doing on a day-to-day basis. So work instructions, what the lines look like, who does what, the workflows, the processes, etc. So a very significant change that would allow them to meet the demand and be one of those companies that says, yeah, we don't have as many new employees, so we don't have to do as many drug screening, but we have this huge demand over here that needs to be fulfilled. So they've already been one of those forward thinkers. They've gone digital. They have 13 global sites, and the number of tests that they are conducting has skyrocketed. I think it's a 2,700% increase. They have the MasterControl QMS, and they've been able to leverage that digital technology as they adapt their own organization, ensuring that the new people that haven't been performing these tests are actually following the right set of instructions at the right time, have the right training, and are following a standard set of processes while they do that new business to meet the new demand. So, switching over to another aspect, remote workforce and the global offices, and specifically the power of digital and how technology can help companies address this. And for me, having been around for decades in this industry, it harkens back to anytime, anywhere access. When cell phones were first coming out, the big benefit statement was anytime, anywhere access. When you were able to dial in remotely to the internet, anytime, anywhere access. It sounds awfully passé. It sounds like something we did in the 80s. But for life science manufacturers, this is a real problem because they're still using a lot more paper than we would like them to be doing. So even though it's something you take for granted, it makes not all life science manufacturers have gone digital, and certainly within their own processes, we see 90 to 95% of life science manufacturers actually using paper for their batch records and device history records.
Okay. Standardized processes, this is something that I touched on before. So even during a normal year, having those standardized processes is critical, but even more so now with the remote workforce, and especially for those that have global sites. So with the lockdown, we were seeing different countries going on lockdown at different times, and often they didn't have a lot of notice when those lockdowns were coming, so they didn't have time to plan how to pass information back and forth. One of our MasterControl customers, Carestream Health, they have offices in the United States as well as Shanghai, China. And there was a time when you can imagine Shanghai was the first to go remote and be working from home while dealing with the manufacturing process. Those in the United States were in the office, and then the situation switched a little bit. They have had MasterControl's manufacturing product in place throughout the implementation process, and they were able to continue their work on those device history records in collaboration with China and those in the United States while they were remote. And so having those standardized processes that can be accessed from anywhere at any time, like Brian mentioned, has been critical through their success as they implement this product. And without a strong understanding of process and access to the data that houses that process, this would have been a really difficult transition. And it's not just those master templates that they're working on, but the fact that they could log into a system with just a few clicks and see where a product was at in its manufacturing process. They could feel confident that both sites were following a similar process that they had laid out. And then we have things like defects and deviations, and when you have those standardized processes in place, you can know that no matter where those are taking place from, they're going to be following the process that's been laid out. Then we have data integrity. This is a huge motivator for many who move to a digital system. The accuracy and consistency of batch records and device history records is incredibly important. And there are so many things that are available in a digital system that are not available on paper. So these are things like calculations. You can take a value from anywhere in a manufacturing record, put it somewhere else into a calculation, have that validated calculation output. You can set rounding and precision on those values. Those things happen automatically and don't need to be revalidated every time they happen. Part 11, compliant signatures. As users log into a digital system, that system can start tracking every action they're taking, automatically track that with the date format there already. Limits can be put on numeric entries, for example. So if someone is entering a pH, there's no reason that we should allow them to enter more than 14. So these are the kind of controls that we can put around entries in these records to help with that accuracy and consistency. Additionally, there are things like conditional paths. So based on a certain outcome, you may or may not need to do certain steps, and those can be configured to be automatically NA'd. So you reduce the chance that an operator is going to make a mistake in that area. You can assign roles to specific steps or have certain people get notified when the process gets to a certain step. People can witness and verify with just an e-signature. And then we have connections to other systems and the advantages that come from having one ecosystem where all of that data is connected. And that's something we're going to get into a little bit later. And those are really just a few examples when we talk about data integrity and some of the advantages that come with having a digital system. Then we look at real-time collaboration. This is something that we've touched on a little bit already as well. So from work instructions that need to be referenced during the manufacturing process, knowing that any changes that need to be made can be collaborated upon and approved regardless of where someone is located, from being able to collaborate on those master templates or device history records, like in the CareStream situation. Collaboration is absolutely critical and is much more difficult without a digital system that can help facilitate this. One customer example that comes to mind is Wellington, and they are a longtime customer of MasterControl, Wellington Foods out of California. And they told me that very recently they actually were able to facilitate an NSF audit using MasterControl, and that audit was able to happen remotely. So the auditor was not on site. Some of the Wellington employees were in their office, but what they were able to do is give the auditor a login so the auditor could log into the MasterControl system. And then they had pre-configured what the auditor could see and had given them all of the relevant documents. Anything additional that they asked for, they were able to get those and load them into a location where the auditor had access to. So it's pretty incredible that this is something they were able to facilitate 100% remotely using a digital system like MasterControl. Risk mitigation. So in an ordinary situation, increasing demand that Brian and I have talked about many times can be a risk in general, but now even more so when we're talking about supplier quality, the ability to scale, follow processes at scale, make sure that you're still keeping the same product quality is critically important. And having a digital system really is able to reduce some of the risks that can come along with this. From the ability to ensure that the correct work instructions and SOPs are referenced during the manufacturing process, deviations are completed to the company standards and being appropriately communicated and followed. And with a digital system, these are just some of the things that really become inherent.
Thanks, Katie. You did a great job consolidating the benefit statements for a digital system. We have entirely separate webinars that we've done.
I could go on for a long time.
We could go on and on. And if you haven't seen those, recommend you going and check out some of those. Hopefully we'll have some links to those available when you're looking at this webinar. So next slide. So we're going to talk about, this is in contrast or addressing the slide previously that talked about the trend where we're seeing an increasing number of partners being used, outsourcing, etc. And so in in light of that, what we want to do is emphasize the value of having connected systems and the benefits that you'll be able to obtain. So a customer example that I'd like to highlight, Carestream Health. They make X-ray equipment, and they were formerly known as Kodak Imaging. So if you can think about Kodak Imaging, this is a really large company, over 5,000 employees. They have a site in Rochester, a site in Shanghai, and about they have 5 to 10 other sites that aren't using our software yet, but hopefully will be soon. And what they were able to do in terms of connecting their systems is an element I'll describe as previously one of our main champions there had to be on site during production runs. And this goes, the same is true for Wellington. We've grown accustomed and comfortable with key people being available, even if they're not on the manufacturing shop floor. They're there to solve problems because something might come up. In both cases, what we've learned through this COVID experience is many of those individuals can work from home, just like I've been doing and Katie and most of you probably have been doing. They can do that if they have the support of the digital tools. And so being able to connect the systems, if you think about the connections and suppliers, you can also think about this from my company and other companies. You can also think about it as my site versus other sites. And there's another aspect, which is my shift and the other shift. Going digital and being able to adopt digital allows greater visibility and just what's going on. So that individual who's working at the Rochester site, who's actually working at home, has complete visibility late at night as to what's happening in the Shanghai office and where their production runs are, all because it's on a digital platform.
The next point there is maintaining data integrity and real-time visibility. And in this instance, Wellington comes to mind again. They are a contract manufacturer of nutritional dietary supplements, both in liquid and powder form. They have over 150 employees at their site in California, and they were really seeing an increase in demand for their products. And at this point, they were really realizing that a paper-based system wasn't going to scale, and it wasn't going to allow them to be successful and meet some of that increased demand. It was just too slow, cumbersome, error-prone, and was taking a lot of unnecessary time and resources. So they saw an opportunity with MasterControl's manufacturing platform, and they've seen some pretty amazing results. They've actually been able to decrease data input errors by 90 to 100%, which is huge. A lot of this comes down to some of the things that I was mentioning in the last slide in terms of data integrity, accuracy, consistency, some of those controls that you can put in a digital record that are not available in the paper world. They're able to have someone come in who might be an entirely new employee and make a lot less mistakes than they would if they went to paper, where they just don't have those controls and have the opportunity to make some of those mistakes that then in turn take someone to identify those mistakes, to find that person to correct them. And it becomes a huge rabbit hole of lost time and productivity. Wellington also saw reduced time to complete post-production review by 75 to 80%. So this is the final review and release of the record. In the paper process, you're looking through tens, maybe hundreds of pages of paper, checking every line item. This is an optimization that we can see in a digital platform where you really don't have to do that. The digital platform is able to aggregate those areas of interest for you in what MasterControl calls the review by exception page, so that you can take a look at those, see where the issues are, and really expedite that process and save the company in turn a lot of time and money by decreasing the time that it takes to actually review and release those final records. And then when we look at improving quality and manufacturing efficiencies, in a paper-based system, people can spend a lot of time on things that really don't add value. So these can be things that I've alluded to, like finding pages of paper that are out on the manufacturing floor, validating calculations over and over again every time they happen, because certainly humans can make mistakes with calculations. tracking down signatures. Maybe someone missed a section that they were filling out in the batch record and then they went on vacation. So all these types of things really, really add up and reduce the efficiency that a company is able to have. So with the digital system, you can also allow identification of areas of improvement much easier. So not only do you have the ability to get rid of these little things that are taking time, but once you have access to that data, you can have a better view of where are the areas for improvement, where are we seeing slowness or issues, and identify those. So those are just a few reasons why a digital system really helps with quality and manufacturing efficiency as a whole. One of our customers, Gritstone Oncology, they have several sites throughout the United States. They make cancer immunotherapy. They are predicting that they're going to be able to scale their company with 30% fewer resources because of what I just mentioned. And with the digital system, it's also going to allow their employees to focus on things that are really important, allow quality to focus on quality, things that are actually going to improve the organization, the bottom line, the quality of the product, rather than doing these things like chasing down signatures. And same for the manufacturing group as well. They're going to have more time to focus on the product efficiency, the product quality, when they're not doing some of these non-value add activities that seem to come with paper.
And speaking of value, that last bullet up there is accelerating speed. There's a theoretical argument about when is value delivered. And as a software company, we talk about how valuable it is to design a feature and implement a feature and get a feature out the door. But realistically, value is not yet delivered until the customer actually uses that feature. And the same is true for any other organization. Until your finished good is consumed by the end user, end consumer, it's just a product waiting to be used. And so I wanted to highlight, when we talk about accelerating speed, one of the key values that a digital system can provide is highlighted in the Wellington example, and many of our other customers experience this, and that is when the product gets completed, it's not really ready to go until all of the paperwork is done. And in a life sciences organization, that can be weeks. So when a lot or a batch of materials and finished goods are available, too often, those are just sitting on the shop floor for days or weeks at a time, waiting for the final batch record to be reviewed and signed off to making sure all the right things that needed to happen actually did happen. So accelerating speed, to me, it means we're really helping our customers deliver their value to their consumers faster, which only happens once the consumer actually uses the product. But wait, there's more. Harnessing the power of data. Just as a high-level overview, what we've been talking about are the challenges that COVID has accelerated or increased, and the technology that can be used to improve processes and make things go faster and enable collaboration and work from home. Well, that means going digital, and one of the hidden benefits of going digital is being able to actually leverage the data that's a byproduct of when you do go digital. So here's a slide. I'll walk you through some scenarios of that and contrast paper versus digital. So capturing real-time production data. In the life sciences manufacturing environment, when you capture data in today's environment, it means writing on a piece of paper. The paper goes on the traveler or the batch record or the device history record, goes into the end of the line, goes into a banker's box, gets filed away. There is no collecting of that data. If you go with a digital system, then it's a little bit more like a Google search. Well, let me go find where product XYZ was implemented, built using supplier materials ABC. It's just at your fingertips because it is a computerized system. And so the digital system, the way of collecting the data is completely different than if you have a paper-based system. Well, what can you do it? With that, the second little rectangle, you can quickly identify bottlenecks and production issues, which it makes me question for those companies, which I think 90 to 95% of life science manufacturers are still doing, those companies that are using paper, how are they doing the continuous improvement? How are they inspecting where the bottlenecks are? I know everybody's doing a great job at what they can see, but they're hamstrung. They're limited by what they can see because all the data is on the paper. And so they'll do the very best they can, but with this additional data, they'll be better able to trend changes of data elements happening, performance of line operators, shifts, sites, etc. And so you gain real-time improvements, or you support those Lean, Six Sigma, continuous improvement projects by digitizing. And that's one of those things that not everybody realizes initially. They just want to solve the paper. They want to get rid of the paper. They want to get rid of the problems. But there's more that can be done and achieved if you digitize. The third rectangle is an example of some more of that, and that is you automate the traceability. I mentioned often in the paper-based world, it's put those records are put in bankers' boxes. And so if you have a year from now an issue that a supplier has identified and needs you to go back and check where your products are, that could be a real challenge if you have to go scour bankers' boxes to try to find out and trace where those materials were actually used. And as a result, if you have to do a recall, you may have to just do a very broad recall of all products produced in the last 6 months or during that time period. However, if you have digital and you know more specifically about exactly which material was used on which lots, then you're able to save tons of dollars, millions of dollars, potentially, by being able to bracket a recall. So maybe it's only materials that were used on products that were produced at site A during the 3rd week in June, instead of having to recall 6 months of products. And as Katie mentioned, Wellington earlier, if you have a digital system, you're always audit ready. 24/7, 365 days a year, you don't have to have that huge project because you found out that an auditor is going to come in next week. You just are always ready for that. And that last one is easily collaborate across departments. And when I say departments, think about sites, countries, shifts, etc. When you have a piece of data that's on a piece of paper, if the piece of paper was here, Katie and I could see it, but you wouldn't be able to see what's on that paper. And when you go digital, when the need is there, anybody that needs access to see what's on that digital piece of paper can see it, even if you're working from home or even if you're working in a different country.
Okay, moving on to the connection point that I discussed very briefly earlier. So with the digital system, it's going to allow all of those data points to be connected and contextualized. So there are a lot of different data points that we think of when we think of the manufacturing process and the inputs and the outputs that come with that. Many of them might be inherent to a QMS, a quality management system. These are things like work instructions and SOPs, for example. So with those, when you have those connected to your manufacturing documents, such as your batch records and your device history records, you're able to have a link from those documents directly to those SOPs and work instructions. And that comes with many advantages, one of them being you're always going to know that that link is referencing the latest released revision of that document without ever having to think about it. If you make a change, that can be immediately reflected everywhere that document is linked. And additionally, in a digital system, you can have that link be dynamic until it's used, after which point it can be static. So if you need to go back and see which revision was an operator referencing a couple of years ago when they did this process, you'll be able to do that very easily as well. We then have learning management systems, training records, and with those, a digital system offers the opportunity to be proactive when it comes to training. So instead of completing a batch record and maybe reviewing it or in preparation for an audit, making sure that every person who entered data into that was appropriately trained on all of the processes that they undertook, which can be very time consuming. In a digital system, you can actually be proactive. So if an operator has not completed the training requirements for any processes that they're undertaking during the manufacturing process, you can actually prevent them from entering data until they've completed the training. So you'll never have to spend time after the fact making sure that everyone was appropriately trained. The other element that's very common are those quality events like deviations, and making sure that those are not only connected and visible to the manufacturing process which they're influencing, but you can also do configurations like ensuring a deviation form is complete before you can actually sign off on the final release and review of a batch record, for example. So all of those things are extremely valuable when we talk about QMS, learning management data, and the value of integrating with these digital systems. We then also have equipment calibration systems, for example. That's another very common data input point into these manufacturing records. And you can do things like ensure that a piece of equipment is actually within calibration before it's used, prevent an operator from using a piece of equipment that's out of calibration. You can have the next calibration due date and other associated information come from that equipment calibration system directly into the record, so eliminating the room for error when we're talking about dual entry that can come with some of these things, especially when we're talking about from paper to paper to paper. When we think about dual entry, we often think about ERP integrations and the connection between the materials in the ERP system and their consumption during the manufacturing process. And there are a lot of different value points that we can look at in terms of ERP integrations with an electronic batch record or device history record system. So some of the most common use cases that we come across are the ability to have an ERP launch a record, so launch a batch record, for example, based off of a customer work order with all the set configurations. There is also the opportunity to validate that the material that the operator is using is indeed the material that's been allocated for that lot, and if not, it can be rejected. If it's correct, there's the ability to pull in all of this associated information directly from the ERP system. So again, you have that one source of truth, and you're really eliminating the room for error with dual entry. And then the third element is being able to take the information from the record, such as the amount of material that's been used, and actually update the ERP system with that information. So all of these enhancements, including other common examples, connecting or collecting information from SCADA or MES systems and having those automatically transfer into the record. All of these areas are great areas of improvement in a digital system when you're able to connect all of these disparate systems and bring them together and eliminate any need for dual entry. And once you have all of your data in one location, it really opens up a world of opportunities. So some things I've mentioned a little bit earlier, you can easily enforce limits, and those can also be tracked. So it's easy to notice not only when a limit is exceeded at that point in time, but also to start seeing when that's happening, why that's happening, what are the commonalities. Is it happening with a certain piece of equipment, with a certain person, a time of day? All of this information is there. We also have things like training that become real-time and a part of the process, day in and day out, as opposed to a paper that's reviewed once every 6 months or once a year when the person needs to undergo their training again. And then with that data, we kind of break it up into two different types, one being real-time visibility and the ability to access that real-time data about what's happening right now. For example, line monitoring, looking at what's happening right now in the manufacturing process. How is my line doing? And this can be the ability to see information live time, maybe in a dashboard format with configurable widgets. And these are things in the MasterControl system. We have things like widgets that show you how long a production record or a batch record, device history record has been running, and how does that compare to the fastest time, the slowest time, the average time. Where are products at in the process? How much time is remaining? All of this can be configured in widget form on a dashboard that's relevant to the user. So the user can say, I care about this product at this site, and filter it to their needs so that at any point, at any time, they can access the information that's relevant to them. And this comes into play when we're talking about working remotely, of course, because you can look at this information from your home if you want to. But also when you're in the office, you don't need to walk down several floors to the manufacturing floor. It's just a few clicks away to access the information on this dashboard. We've brought up a little bit the concept of the review by exception page as well, and this is another form of dashboard in the MasterControl system where each running batch has this dashboard available to it that's showing you some of those exceptions that you might be interested in. So form launches, corrections, attachments, these types of things that you want to just go to one page and view really quickly instead of having to sift through pages of paper or look through the entire electronic interface. We can aggregate this information for you real time, and this is an element of speeding up the release, which we talked about earlier, but also that real-time visibility. So if there is an issue, you can address it now instead of waiting until the end of the process. And then the second area when we talk about data and contextualizing is reporting. So this is where we talk about all of the historical data that is now available to you. And the amount of data that becomes available can be a little bit overwhelming. So it's important to understand what are the areas of interest and what is most critical for you and your organization to really start reviewing and tracking. So this could be the processing time between certain steps, the right first time information, like how many corrections, form launches, where those form launches are happening, who's involved. Again, you can make those connections between what's causing this. Does this seem to be happening on a certain product, on a certain line? And all of that information is so valuable for making those business decisions to make those long-term improvements. And then reporting can also have other uses. Brian discussed this with the recall example. You can use a report just to type in, you want to see where you used a material in which lots. Just type that in, and with the click of a button, you're able to access all of that information so easily. Reports can be used as a where use for which products reference SOPs and work instructions, for example. So really the opportunities are limitless once you have all of this data in a digital system and you can access it.
Opening up a world of opportunities. I like that. That's what data can do, and I'm confident we will be having additional webinars that will dive into even more details about how we can help you collect that data, connect the data, but then actually leverage it in your own processes. So, summary, COVID-19, we could go on and on about how it's changed the environment for us, for you, for basically the world. It certainly has changed the manufacturing landscape. We talked about those key changes, driving a remote workforce, causing adaptability, changing demands, etc. And also hopefully some case studies, customer examples of those that had adopted technology so that they were arguably well prepared for such a catastrophe as COVID is. And then the second bullet, those examples highlight what we're trying to emphasize, and that is connected, integrated technologies and going digital. It's really an imperative for adapting and scaling. Your organization, regardless of where you are in your life cycle, is going to change over the next 5 to 10 years. COVID's just making that happen faster. And so regardless of whether you look out for 5 to 10 years or 5 to 10 months, adopting and applying and leveraging technology in the right places will help you adapt more quickly and take advantage of those opportunities that might exist in some of your product lines and move away from some where it doesn't have the same demand. And so the last bullet, I also just provided the teaser. If you go digital, you get the hidden benefit. You get to reveal all of this data that's currently hidden. And when we talk about revealing the data, Katie did a really nice job of, you have data here in your equipment system, you have data here talking about your materials, you have data here in your quality management system, you have data over in your ERP, and on and on and on. The real interesting, fun part for me is by being able to have that same data accessible then we're going to be able to help you find correlations. If certain yields are better because we're using supplier A materials versus supplier B, or if errors are reduced or cycle times are improved because you're on site A versus site B, or line A versus line B, or equipment A or equipment B, it goes on and on and on. But the key is getting to be digital and then having access to that data that's across multiple systems. All of that in the effort to help you do what you do better than anybody else, which is your own decision making and helping you get your products to market faster. Anything you'd add, Katie?
I think you covered it very well.
Okay. So with that, we're going to go to a Q&A session and handle some of the questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian and Katie, for all that amazing information. We've had some questions come in from our attendees. There have been a few questions around a similar topic, so I'm going to kind of jumble these together, but it's with respect to connectivity of systems. So how are you able to connect systems and can you pass information back and forth between those systems? And when you do integrate, what does a typical integration look like?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question and definitely a common one. Often we get questions like, do you integrate with SAP or NetSuite or these specific systems? And the answer is actually that we create our integrations through a middleware, and that middleware actually sort of acts as a switchboard between MasterControl and whatever system that it's connecting with. And that allows us to have really flexible integrations. So we haven't set out to create integrations that are specific to any one other system, but that way we can connect really with whatever systems our customers have that have those external connection capabilities, because we found that there's really a pretty wide variety of ERP systems and these other enterprise systems that our customers are using. So we want to allow for flexibility when it comes to those kinds of integrations. And then I believe the other question was around passing information back and forth. So yes, absolutely. We have, when we're talking about the manufacturing product and the batch records and device history records, we have information coming in, like information about the materials that have been allocated, information about more specifics about those materials. And then you also want to maybe update the ERP with the finished good information, for example, and that's the information that's coming from the MasterControl system. So it does absolutely go both ways.
And one thing I'd add to that is just adding a little more color on the middleware. We're using a technology that's relatively new called Integration Platform as a Service. And there's a variety. We use one called MuleSoft, Dell Boomi. There's a whole category of companies that provide that software. And really the benefit there is their whole business is connecting systems. And so we wouldn't be the first ones to integrate and connect to SAP. There are many others. And so their business is already connected to these endpoints. And we're able to leverage that and pass that on to you. So our integration projects are way shorter than they used to be and less expensive than they used to be. And I'm comparing that to 20 years ago. We had these things called middleware, but it still required effectively a custom application development project. And it's much more about dragging and dropping and making common systems that talk to each other with common data points, just talk to each other more easily.
Awesome. Thank you both. Okay, so here's a forward-looking question. What do you think the manufacturing environments of the future will look like? And specifically, what will people's role be in that environment? Almost alluding to suggesting the fact that maybe people won't be necessary or that manufacturing can be done remotely. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll take the first one. You can jump in. That's a great question, and it's often talked about. In today's day and age, it's all about the robots, and the robots are going to take over the world, and humans are not going to have jobs anymore. That might be true in very limited cases, and I'll explain. And that is, if you're a customer that delivers millions and millions of the same products, so think about Tylenol capsules, then you have the need, you have enough demand that you can afford to automate that entire process. And the goal of companies that are manufacturing that high of a volume is to remove the human error, which means you remove the humans. And so there's very few people and fewer people on those high-end, high-volume production lines. However, in the life sciences industry and many others, not everybody produces the same volume as Tylenol capsules are needed. And so if you have a lower volume, many of our customers, even pretty large customers, they don't use the same and produce the same product on the same line every day. So on Monday, they may have to produce product A, and then on Tuesday, they produce product B. And in doing that, they can't afford to switch the tooling and the automation and all the robots. And so you have to change your mindset if you think about, are robots going to take it over and will humans no longer be required? If you visit a life sciences manufacturer, a GMP shop floor, you'll see lots of people. You'll see lots of people gowned up out across this marker. And the reason they have to do that is people are an integral part of manufacturing and staying flexible so that I can do one line on Monday, one product on Monday, and a different product on Tuesday. And there's some, if you want to research more, Gartner and others are talking about a connected worker. And so instead of displacing the workers in these manufacturing environments, we're helping that worker be connected to other systems. That's also sometimes called the smart worker. And it's really not about replacing the operator, the human. It's about augmenting the human so they have easier access to various systems and data so they can do their jobs better. I think that covered. Anything else you'd add?
I think you covered it.
Great.
Awesome. Okay, so another question, kind of forward-looking, but do you think that this remote working trend will continue?
I think that it will continue, at least to a certain extent, for those that have been able to work from home successfully. And in the life science examples, it might be someone who's reviewing a batch record, or might be in charge of making sure a deviation gets closed, or collaborating on some type of work instruction or document. Those who had these digital systems in place found that they were able to do these things really very similar to how they were able to do them in the office. And there are, of course, some other advantages that come from working from home, like not having to commute into the office, things like that. So I could definitely see a trend where we do see working from home and working remotely becoming much more common.
Yeah, I agree. I think that COVID, again, has forced us. And since it's been quite a few months, we've all gotten good at it. People have just gotten better at it now. You know, maybe we fumbled a little bit in the beginning figuring out all of our Zoom technology, but then we picked it up and we got it, and now things are functioning pretty well. I agree with that sentiment on that. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. How will these technologies hold up, so to speak, with respect to compliance and audit when dealing with bodies like the FDA or other regulatory bodies around the world?
Great question. I'll chime in first. MasterControl is a life sciences vendor. We've catered our business to life science customers for 20 years. So we're really well aware. We have specialists who know way more than I do about software validation and medical device, predicate rules, et cetera, et cetera. And so for us, it's second nature. All of our systems come with the required audit trails, Part 11 signature. Not only is it validatable with the correct protocols, we try to help our customers leverage technology to make that process so we have better and faster. So we have this tool called Validation Excellence. So if you're looking for digital technologies and you're a life sciences manufacturer, I would strongly encourage you look to a software provider who has deep experience in life sciences, FDA regulations, et cetera. If you go outside of that, you do run the risk of, I didn't know before coming to MasterControl, I didn't know what computer software validation was, I didn't know what Part 11 was. And many other software vendors, if you're not serving this industry, they won't. So you will definitely, absolutely run the risk of having problems. The software might work great, probably will work great, but will it stand up in an audit? you run that risk. So as long as you're dealing with a software vendor who has designed from the beginning their software and the solutions, they knew that they were going to be providing it to a med device, biotech, pharma, FDA regulated company, I think you'll be just fine.
Thank you, Brian and Katie, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody, bye-bye.